So, I don't know if you've ever heard of that interesting study. I think it was either with M&Ms or with Skittles, and it was with preschoolers. And what they would do, preschoolers or kindergartners, maybe the teachers have heard of this one before, but it deals with what we call delayed gratification or instant gratification. And what they would do is they would have, I believe, 2 M&Ms, and they would just sort of put them right on the table, and they would say, in a little cup, and they would say, you can eat these anytime. If you're hungry, just go for it. But if you wait for 40 minutes or an hour or whatever that time was, then we're going to give you double. And there were some that said, well, I just want those right now. And they just grabbed them and ate them. And then there were others that found ways to play, to enjoy the time, to pass that time. And then at the very end of that, they received double of that. And they actually did what you call like a life study. So they kind of followed these preschoolers or kindergartners. And it was amazing to see that, generally speaking, those who waited and learned how to say no to something immediately for something much greater and deeper later actually became very happy, successful, different things like that as a whole. Whereas those that just kind of jumped into it and maybe more impulsive and just sort of grabbed whatever they could right in front of them right then didn't seem to have the same kind of greater life experiences later on in life. And that became maybe a struggle to grab what was right in front versus waiting and actually receiving something so much greater. And that's really one of the great wisdoms of Lent and actually of the Christian life, is that God, when he says let go of something or when he says say no to something, he's actually wanting us to have a deeper happiness. He knows that there's something more, that if we jump into the thing right in front of us, then we're ultimately not going to be fulfilled. We might be fulfilled for a moment, but we won't have the lasting happiness. And so the first reading today speaks about the Lord setting before you 2 paths. One of them is life. One of them is death and doom. And you'd think, which one? If you were right in front of God and he said, well, would you like life and happiness? Or would you like death and doom? Now, how many of you would be like, I'd like a doom, please, for 500? It's like, no. I mean, you want life, you want prosperity, you want happiness. But why is it that we usually go after the death and doom aspect? Because that's sin. And why is it that there's something about sin that becomes very attractive? It actually goes back to this idea that the Lord talks about of saying, if you want to follow me, if you want to experience true happiness, you have to be willing to pick up your cross daily and follow me. If you really want to find your life, you need to lose it. You need to let go of the whole world in order to actually gain something much greater. That's also why we heard what Jesus said in the very beginning of his gospel preaching, that we prayed at that verse before the gospel. Repent. Turn away from the things right in front of you that are easy to grab, and wait for the greater thing. I want you to think of this in terms of temptations. All of us struggle with different temptations. Maybe we struggle with, we feel this anger and we just want to, lash out right then and there. It feels good to be able to maybe say something unkind back, or to gossip, or, maybe we struggle with purity and maybe it's like, well, I want to just, go to this particular click on the computer or whatever. Maybe it's, well, there's all this food in front of me, I just want to take the whole thing. Or maybe it's the struggle with forgiving someone. It's like, well, it feels good to not forgive them. All of those things, these temptations, they always promise something in the immediate. They promise a happiness that's for that 10 minutes. But someone very wise said, in order to fight against temptation, and it goes back to this idea of, do you grab the M&Ms right now, or do you wait for something greater? Anytime you're faced with the lure of a temptation, try to ask yourself the question, what will my life be like in 10 minutes? Because usually we're kind of stuck with the now. And it's like, well, I have to give in to this temptation because it'll feel good. It'll be awesome. There'll be peace, there'll be happiness. There won't be suffering. And there won't for that brief period of time. But then think about after 10 minutes. Haven't we had that experience? We grab all the food. Maybe we did this on Fat Tuesday. I think I might have done this too, where we kind of grab it, we don't really think, and then afterwards we're just kind of like, I feel miserable. Or maybe we just, someone makes us mad or something, or maybe one of our parents just kind of, pokes the heart in a certain way, and we just lash out and we say something that's really, really horrible. We say something to one of our classmates, and it feels very, very good right at that moment to say, I'd let him have it. But then how do we feel after? That sense of, wow, I broke trust. I hurt someone that loves me. There's a lot of different things that we can fall into. Ask yourself always the question, what will my life be like in 10 minutes? And probably for most of us, because all of us here have fallen into temptation in some way or another, we know that experience, that there's this promise of greatness, of living life, of awesomeness, of joy, of pleasure, of happiness, and we just bite into that. But then afterwards, we're empty. We're maybe more dry than we were before. We don't really feel good about ourselves. We feel hollow. And that lasts a lot longer. That's what the Lord is saying to Moses. Which do you want? Do you want a path that just leads to emptiness? That leads to the lack of life? Or are you willing to wait, to pick up your cross, to be able to say no to the instant gratification of the M&Ms that are right in front of you? To be able to suffer through that? To be able to experience something so much better and so much more lasting and so much more peaceful on the other side of that 10 minutes? It's hard when we're in the middle of the battle. But if you keep every day just going back to that sense of, Lord, help me when the temptation comes to think about the next 10 minutes. And am I willing to suffer just for that little bit of time to experience a much longer lasting future full of hope? There's a wonderful author, his name is Matthew Kelly. And he says this, and I think this is a great way of, if we want to, someone tells us like, well, just be holy. And you're like, well, that's hard. I can't do that. And then he kind of goes back and he says, well, for the next 60 seconds, can you think good thoughts? Say good words. Do good things. You say, well, for 60 seconds I could do that. Okay, well, just do that. Try that now for 60 seconds. And then when that 60 seconds is over, try it again. Try it again. Try it again. Do you see how a lot of times we get crippled by sort of looking at this huge, giant thing? It's like if your teacher's saying you have to read this entire library. You're like, I can't do that. So then we don't even start. But what if they were just to say, read this paragraph today, and then tomorrow read this next paragraph, and this next paragraph, and next paragraph, and pretty soon, after an entire year, you've read a library. So the Lord wants us to start small, bite-sized pieces, but think about that in terms of temptation. Think about just the 10 minutes. Are you willing to just wait through the temptation for the 10 minutes so you can experience double the happiness on the other side?